They specifically say that the first round of payments have to go out on October 15th, 2024,
Stop
which is
it.
exactly 3 weeks before the election.
This segment is brought to you by Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. I'm down 37 pounds on the program, and I lost most of that in just 2 months. Do what I did and what so many other undivided viewers have done. Schedule your free 15-minute consultation today at eastsideweightlossclinic.com. So this story was first broke by Todd Myers, our friend over at the Washington Policy Center. The headline, Proposed House Budget Promises $200 checks, but only if voters keep the CO2 tax. So we're going to have Todd on to explain all of this. But essentially, it does amount to an effort to bribe voters ahead of the November election, where the initiative to repeal the CCA will be on the ballot, by promising them checks, refund checks from all the money they've brought in through the CCA. But they're not going to give you those checks from money from an account they already have if you decide to repeal the CCA. I also wanted to ask Todd about another story that popped up. Just a little bit of context here. People in the ag community were supposed to be exempt from the higher gas prices that resulted from the CCA, but that exemption was never carried out. So now, timing is quite suspicious here. Now Democrats are like, we better issue some refunds to all those farmers and ranchers, millions of dollars this year. We're finally going to do that after being told for years that you were supposed to do it. So here's Todd Myers with the Washington Policy Center. Todd Myers, welcome back to Undivided.
Always nice to talk with you.
The people's champion. Who's that? The Rock? Was The Rock the people's champion? It's Todd Myers now.
People confuse me and The Rock all the time.
Oh, I can see that. Totally. Well, don't say that, because I have a crush on The Rock, and that's my hall pass with my husband. So then he won't let us talk anymore, all of that. It'll be weird. So two things. One, I get really confused because you sent out this tweet saying that in their supplemental operating budget, Senate Democrats are setting aside $30 million to reimburse people in the ag community who had to pay this carbon tax but should have been exempt from it. What I get confused by is the governor says that the CCA didn't raise gas prices, so why would we have to reimburse people in ag for increased gas prices if the CCA didn't increase gas prices?
It's almost as if that claim wasn't honest in the first place.
Oh, that's so strange. Yeah, I want someone to ask Senate Democrats that. Like, hey, I don't get it. I thought that this wasn't a thing. So why are you giving them $30 million? Is $30 million enough?
No, and so in the CCA, the Climate Commitment Act, the CO2 tax, there's actually a clause that says that agricultural businesses, farmers, other folks, will be exempt from paying the tax on CO2, which amounted to, in 2023, about 43 cents per gallon of gas and 53 cents per gallon of diesel. So diesel is much more expensive. A lot of farmers use the diesel. So that is in the law. Department of Ecology was directed to implement that exemption. They simply said, no, we're not going to do it. Now, I don't know how they can do that, but they just did. And then they sort of tried to pass it off on the oil companies, but the oil companies said, well, we don't know how to do it. If we do it and we hand you something, how do we know you're going to accept it? Only the Department of Ecology can do this, and they didn't. So for a year, agricultural businesses have been paying this extra tax that they're not supposed to by law. There's a variety of estimates. It's hard to pin down because, people aren't keeping their receipts. Some estimates are about between 125 and 150 million dollars that they have paid. Now, that seems reasonable because the state has collected about $1.6 billion. And so what we're talking about is about 10% of that coming from agricultural businesses. But what they've offered is, instead of 125 or 150 million, 30 million. Now, how they came up with that number, they just made it up, right? They just said, well, let's throw them 30 million and see how we do. It still doesn't do anything close to implementing what the law is supposed to.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is you can give them some of this money back, but it sounds like they're going to continue to have that problem moving forward, that they're paying a tax that they're not supposed to be paying.
Exactly. And again, the money is in the state coffers. So agricultural businesses have paid this money through increased prices on gasoline. So the state has the money. they should give it back. They should, and as you say, ongoing, Department of Ecology should do its job and implement what the law says so that they don't have to keep paying this.
And also, like you said, it's complicated to figure out how much, because of receipts and all of this, how much was paid that shouldn't have been paid. How would they even propose doling out $30 million if it's hard to know how much they owe to individual farmers and the people in the ag community?
People would, offer receipts or apply or something like that. But not everybody has every receipt that they, have that they have collected over the last year. So it's a very poor system, and they need to fix this going forward.
Yeah, I mean, they could. My idea is they could just ask Attorney General Bob Ferguson's office to dole out the $30 million because I hear he's really, really good at getting checks in the hands of people who they are rightfully belong to.
Yeah, there's one other thing I want to add, which is that unlike other businesses or oil companies or things like that who simply pass along the tax, right? That's what you want. The reason that gas prices went up is because logically, if you add a tax, it gets passed on. Farmers can't do that. Farmers are price takers. There's a commodity market. So if you grow wheat, there's a commodity market. You sell your wheat at the price in the commodity market. You can't say, hey, I got to add because I paid more for diesel. It's just like, sorry, right? You get to get the price that everyone else gets for your commodity. So they're kind of in a bind where, unlike other businesses who can build those costs in, farmers really can't.
Yeah. A question on this that is going to segue into the next topic on this we're going to discuss. Is this just Democrats trying to appease people who are upset about the Climate Commitment Act since there's an initiative to repeal it?
I think that's probably part of it. It's an issue that's been going on. It was long before Initiative 2117. So they have been discussing it for a while. I do think this is sort of a cheap way to try to do it, which is just like, all right, here's $30 million. But it's not a new issue. And like I said, the Inslee administration could fix this tomorrow, right? The governor could say, Department of Ecology, you need to fix this.
Yeah.
He has. So I think that's a problem.
Yeah. So segueing into what it seems like bribery. I mean, maybe you have a different interpretation of it, but House and Senate budget writers, again, on the Democratic side, they want to send residents $200 checks this year, and it would be from proceeds that have come in through the higher prices that people are paying at the pump. I guess, is this just hey, we got more money than we expected, so here's some of it back?
Well, maybe. I mean, right? That's a generous interpretation. So, they expected to get, I think, if I remember correctly, between $200 and $300 million. Last year, they ended up getting 1.6 billion. So they got a lot of money on their hands. So 150 million of that, the House and Senate have offered to give back in the form of $200 checks to utility customers, starting with low income and then sort of moving up. They say low to medium, moderate income utility customers. Now, what makes it suspect is the timing. So in the Senate, what they say is that the checks have to go out in 2024. Theoretically, they could go out, I suppose, in December of 2024 after the election, but I think that's probably unlikely. I think they want them to go out before the election. And in fact, the House is different. They specifically say that the first round of payments have to go out on October 15th, 2024, which is exactly 3 weeks before the election.
Stop. Right when people are getting their ballots.
Correct.
You cannot make this stuff up. Whose name would be on the checks?
So that's another thing is that it's unclear, but the budget in both the House and Senate say that the language, now what happens is that the state pays utilities and utilities give the checks to the utility customer. So it doesn't come directly from the state.
Okay.
But the language in both budgets specifically says that whatever language accompany those checks must be approved by the Department of Commerce.
There it is. Yep, there it is. And I imagine that if some Democrats are so keen on putting these checks in the hands of Washingtonians, right at the same time they're getting their ballots in the mail, that language is going to be very very specific toward what a wonderful thing this is that they're doing. Now, there's another wrinkle to this and another kicker, and that is that Democrats are saying that these checks would go out in a couple rounds, but the second round, they say they're going to cancel if voters pass the initiative to overturn the CCA.
That's right.
It sounds like a threat.
Yeah. So the first round in the House version, 75 million, half of the 150 million, would go out 3 weeks before the election. The other half would go out in February of 2025 unless voters pass Initiative 2117, in which those checks are canceled. So there was a kerfuffle about this. Joe Fitzgibbon, who was one of the Democrat leaders, was asked about this, and he said, well, like, we can't promise to send money if we don't have the money if they've repealed the CO2 tax. There's a problem with that. That's a lie. The money is already in the state coffers. Okay? They already have the money. This is not promising money that wouldn't exist. This is just saying, well, instead of giving it to you, we're just going to keep it for ourselves in the general fund and spend it how we want. How do I know this? Because the Senate spends all 150 million independent of whether the initiative passes. So the Senate says, well, yeah, we have the money, so here, we're going to give it out to as many people as we can. Only Joe Fitzgibbon is saying, we don't know if we're going to have the money. It's just dishonest.
Oh, it's a complete lie. And also, I would argue that it's even greater cause to give that money back to people if voters repeal the CCA. If voters say, we don't want this thing, you've got the money from the CCA sitting in an account, a program that now voters have repealed, it makes even more sense to keep giving that money back to them.
Exactly. Why not just give back all the money that hasn't been spent? But they don't want to do that. They want to use it in whatever way they can to encourage people to keep it around. And again, this is a one-time payment. This is not, hey, every year you're going to get these $200 checks because we're making so much money. British Columbia has a carbon tax, a flat carbon tax, and as part of that law, they rebate back to the people of British Columbia. So what they say is, you'll get the rebates, but if you use less gasoline and emit less CO2, then your tax will be lower, so you'll end up doing better. There's the incentive there. So it can be done. You can say, look, if we get more than this, it goes back in the form of a tax rebate. They don't simply want to do it, and it's even worse than that. They want to use it to sort of tell people, do what we want, or we're going to keep the money.
Yeah, exactly. It's a form of bribery, a little bit of a threat there. And yeah, it's 100%, if you were going to do it on a continuing basis, and if it's repealed, then obviously you couldn't give rebates on a continuing basis for a revenue stream that's no longer coming in. But as you point out, that's not what's happening here. One more, I guess, point. You mentioned that Fitzgibbon, that's just a demonstrable lie to say, oh, we can't give refunds in 2025. We don't have the money, because they do. We've seen so many blatant lies, though. I mean, I pointed out Senator Marco Lias, who's saying that if voters repeal the CCA, we might not have money for bridge maintenance and road maintenance in communities across the state. You know where the CCA money is going. Is any money from the CCA going to fix our bridges and roads?
No. In fact, the CCA, the CO2 tax, specifically says money cannot be used for 18th Amendment purposes. The 18th Amendment to the Washington State Constitution says that gas taxes go to road maintenance, road construction, bridge maintenance, those sorts of things. And the CCA specifically says you cannot use this money for that. So it's just not true.
Why do you think he does it? This is coming from his government social media account, and he continues to do it. I mean, how... it's such a frustration of mine, because I imagine he does it because he thinks he can get away with it. But how do we sort of help people see through these just lies?
Frustrating. It wasn't just that he put it out. They created a graphic, right? So they actually thought about, here's the argument we're going to make. Let's make a graphic, even though we know it's nonsense. Look, I've been in politics a long time. It is not a shock to me that politicians lie. It is a shock at how blatant the lies have become, where they're just completely made up. It is shocking to me that people keep going back to, right? This isn't the first time Joe Fitzgibbon has lied about this issue, the governor, Mark Elias, these folks. Um, and look, there's a difference between having a difference of perspective. There are some people who just disagree with me because they think climate change is worth addressing. It's a risk. We need to do these things. Fine, we can disagree with that. That's not a lie. That's just a disagreement. It's a different opinion about
Yeah.
risk tolerance. But what we're seeing, and the Mark Elias thing, is just dishonest, and it's very frustrating to me, and we can't make good policy. And I'll add one more thing, which is there are things that I think we should do to fight climate change. There are things that are effective. But what I get back from people when I try to do a policy that says, look, I think this would work, is from people saying, yeah, Todd, but if we do that, politicians will just manipulate it and abuse it and screw it up. So why should we do anything? So it just lends to nihilism. So the people who say, well, I don't understand why climate change and the environment is so partisan, I'll tell them part of the reason is that when people like me say, you're right, let's address these issues, people on my side, people who traditionally agree with me say, Todd, you can't trust anything they say. We can't do anything. And so it makes it hard for me to agree with the very people who are saying, why can't you help us address these problems?
Yeah, and I understand the skepticism from the right. I mean, you've covered this issue. We just talked about it on the show last week, how, one of the things they're doing with these CCA funds, $70 million, they shut down a 2,000-acre working forest, and that would actually have a net negative on the environment and carbon sequestration. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
so you're doing something, a whole program designed to help the environment, and you're explicitly doing things that even the Commissioner of Public Lands, who's a Democrat, says, that's not going to help the environment, and you're doing it anyway. So it's hard to trust that they're going to actually spend money on things that'll help.
Oh, I get the skepticism. And when people push back on me on that, I get why they do it. I just think we can't succumb to nihilism.
Yeah.
Now, what my argument has been is that we need to push more power in the hands of individuals who have incentives to do the right thing, to, benefit the environment, rather than hoping politicians will do the right thing, because we know the answer to that. They won't always. That's the strategy that I've used. But when it comes to policy, right? We're the Washington Policy Center. We're trying to find good policy. When it comes to policy, we can't just be nihilist and say, well, anything we do is going to get screwed up, so we should do nothing. No, we need to keep trying to do good policies, but we need to be really hard on the folks who make it difficult to do good policy by being dishonest. And there's a lot of dishonesty right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, you kind of built right up to it perfectly, Todd, so I can't have you on without pitching your book, which talks about those very ideas. So go ahead, we'll end there.
Yeah, so time to think small, right? Rather than big government, think small efforts. And it's remarkable. There's so many cool examples of people doing small things that add up to huge environmental impacts. The example I love to give is ocean plastic, where there's a program that basically pays people in developing countries to pick up plastic off the beach. They have picked up 2 billion pounds of plastic to keep it out of the ocean just by doing these things and using simple technologies. So the other thing I like about this is that, your listeners, people come to me all the time and say, oh, my kids are in college and are telling me all about all the government things we need to do to help the environment. And so my book, the foreword is written by somebody from the World Wildlife Fund. These ideas appeal to people who care about the environment, people on the left who care about the environment, but are tired of government failure. And we see so much government failure.
Yeah, so what Todd's trying to say is buy the book for your high schoolers. Try to combat some of what they're hearing from other people. Buy the book for your college students. So Todd Myers, we always appreciate you and you pointing out some of these things that I think otherwise would go unnoticed.
It's always nice to talk with you. Thank you so much for having me on.
There he is, Todd Myers. And you're talking about, too, we don't need any more smoking guns. On the whole, Climate Commitment Act is increasing gas prices. We've had as many smoking guns as any person needs to prove that the governor is lying about that. But the whole ag exemption is in and of itself a smoking gun. Why would you have to exempt ag from paying higher gas prices if the CCA doesn't raise gas prices? That makes no sense. But also these checks, blatant bribery, and also the threat of punishment. to want to send out checks just when people are getting their ballots in October, when the initiative to repeal the CCA is going to be on the ballot, and then saying, and we won't send out the second half of the checks if you guys repeal the CCA. They should be sending out all of the money. They should send all the money back to people if we repeal the CCA.